siren didn't just rise. It clawed its way through the thick, stagnant air of Courtroom State Prison, a piercing wail that vibrated in the fillings of your teeth. In a place built on the bedrock of monotonous routine, the sound was a rupture, a violent tearing of the fabric of order. Guards moved with a disciplined urgency, their boots pounding on the concrete, their shouts sharp and guttural. The lockdown was instantaneous. Steel doors slammed shut in a deafening chorus, sealing thousands of men into their concrete boxes. In the administrative wing, the chaos was more controlled, but no less frantic. A young correctional officer, his face pale and slick with sweat, had found her. In the sterile, pale-green confines of Visiting Room 4, Naya Hayes lay sprawled on the linoleum floor, a crimson bloom spreading from her chest, her sightless eyes reflecting the dull, fluorescent lights above. The American dream, for her, had ended here, in the shadow of a nightmare. Just 2 hours earlier, that same shadow had been cast by the prison itself, a monolithic concrete beast baking under the relentless Central Valley sun. Nia's Lexus sedan, a pearl-white bubble of leather and climate-controlled air, hummed quietly in the visitors' parking lot. The contrast was obscene. Outside, the world was a palette of brown and gray, scorched earth, dust, and the oppressive concrete walls topped with glittering coils of razor wire. Inside her car, the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the soft jazz playing through the speakers. For a moment, she just sat there, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the steering wheel. Every visit began this way, a moment of hesitation, a silent internal battle. For 5 years she had made this pilgrimage, and for 5 years, that hesitation had never faded. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out, the blast of dry heat a physical shock. She was a vision of success, a tailored blazer, sharp trousers, shoes that cost more than a guard's weekly salary. She walked toward the checkpoint, her heels clicking a sharp, defiant rhythm on the cracked asphalt. "Mornin', Mrs. Hayes," said a grizzled guard named Patterson, his eyes doing a slow, appreciative scan that made her skin crawl. It was a familiar, petty display of power, a reminder of where she was and who held the keys. "Officer," she replied, her voice cool, and even as she slid her ID through the slot. "Unscheduled visit. Everything all right on the home front?" he drawled, his tone implying he knew more than he did. "Just a change in my work schedule," she lied smoothly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It was either today or wait another month." She placed her clear plastic bag on the counter. Inside were 2 paperback thrillers and a copy of Architectural Digest. The irony was a bitter pill she'd learned to swallow. She was designing glass and steel temples of commerce in downtown Los Angeles, while her husband, the man who had once designed their future, was confined to a world of concrete and steel bars. The walk through the corridors was a sensory assault. The air was thick with the smell of industrial disinfectant, stale sweat, and something else, the metallic tang of despair. The walls, painted a supposedly calming shade of institutional green, seemed to absorb the light, the color of mold and misery. Her heels, so confident in the parking lot, now seemed to echo with an almost shameful loudness, an alien sound in this world of shuffling feet and muted murmurs. When the door to Visiting Room 4 was unlocked, Malik Hayes was already there. The 5 years inside had chiseled away his youthful softness, replacing it with a lean, hard-edged intensity. His face, once quick to smile, was now a mask of careful neutrality, but his eyes, they were the same. When they locked on hers, the years and the walls and the razor wire seemed to melt away for a fraction of a second. They rushed into an embrace, a practiced, desperate collision. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if it were oxygen. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice rough. "I missed you too," she said, the words feeling both profoundly true and like a terrible betrayal. He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his callous thumbs tracing her cheekbones. His gaze was searching, intense. "You look tired, baby. They working you too hard?" "Just a big project, a deadline," she deflected, leading him to the small table. They sat opposite each other, their knees almost touching. He took her hands, his rough palms enveloping her smooth ones. It was a familiar ritual, but today something felt different. The air was taut, humming with unspoken words. "So, what's new in the world of fancy buildings?" he asked, a ghost of his old teasing smile playing on his lips. She launched into a prepared monologue about her latest project, about city permits and difficult clients. He listened, nodding, but his eyes weren't just on her face. They drifted down to her wrist, where a delicate platinum tennis bracelet glittered under the fluorescent lights. It was new. It was expensive. It was a world away from anything they had ever known together. "That's beautiful," he said, his voice quiet, casual, too casual. "New piece?" Nia's breath hitched. She had forgotten to take it off. A rookie mistake. "Oh, this?" She forced a laugh. "It was a bonus. The firm's been doing really well. Julian, Mr. Sterling, he's very generous with the team when we land a big contract." Malik's eyes narrowed, just for a second. He knew the name Julian Sterling. He was the senior partner, the man whose name was on the letterhead of the letters she sometimes sent. Malik said nothing, just squeezed her hand a little tighter. But the easy warmth between them had vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp chill. The seed of suspicion, dormant for months, had just been watered. And in the oppressive heat of Courtroom State Prison, it was about to grow into something monstrous. Before Corcoran, before the guilty verdict and the shattered dreams, there was Crenshaw. There was the scent of Sunday barbecue smoke hanging in the Los Angeles air, the distant rhythm of a bass-heavy beat from a passing car, and the fierce, unshakable bond between Malik Hayes and Nia Johnson. They were two sides of the same coin, forged in the same neighborhood, but dreaming of different skies. Malik, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, could hear the language of engines. His dream wasn't just to own a garage. It was to build a sanctuary, a state-of-the-art auto shop that doubled as a vocational center, a place where kids from the neighborhood could learn a trade, a place to turn wrenches instead of triggers. He had it all mapped out in a worn spiral notebook. Floor plans, tool lists, even a name: Second Chance Motors. Nia, on the other hand, saw the world in lines and angles. She would look at the dilapidated storefronts and aging bungalows of their neighborhood and mentally redesign them, imagining sleek facades, open spaces, and light-filled rooms. She was the first in her family to go to college, earning a scholarship to USC's prestigious architecture program. She was their escape velocity, the one who was meant to break free from the gravitational pull of their circumstances. Together, they were unstoppable. His grounded ambition was the anchor for her soaring dreams. Their future was a blueprint they designed together, full of whispered promises on warm California nights. A small house in Baldwin Hills, a yard for a dog they'd named Duke, a life built not on immense wealth, but on hard work, love, and community. Then the blueprint was ripped to shreds. The night it happened was like any other. Malik was helping a cousin, Davon, work on his car. Davon was always skirting the edges of trouble, but he was blood. He asked Malik for a ride to pick up some money from a guy in Inglewood. Malik, ever the loyal friend, agreed. He waited in the car, engine idling, scrolling through his phone, while Davin went inside. The next thing he knew, Davin was sprinting back, his eyes wide with panic, shoving a wad of cash into his pocket and screaming, "Go, man, go!" Before Malik could even process what was happening, the night exploded in a symphony of sirens. It was an armed robbery. The man inside the convenience store had a gun. Davon had a prior conviction. The narrative was written the moment the cuffs snapped onto Malik's wrists. He was the getaway driver. His defense was the truth. He didn't know. But the truth was a flimsy shield against the machinery of the justice system. His overworked public defender, buried under a mountain of cases, advised him to take a plea. Malik refused. He was innocent of the charge. He believed in justice. The trial was a blur of legal jargon and damning testimony. The jury, comprised of 11 white faces and one Asian man from the suburbs, looked at Malik, a young, powerfully built black man from Crenshaw, and saw a stereotype, not a person. They didn't see the dreamer with the sketchbook full of floor plans. They saw the getaway driver. The verdict was swift: 15 years to life, with a possibility of parole after 7. While Malik's world shrank to an 8 by 10-foot cell, Nia's began to expand in ways she could never have imagined. After graduating, she landed a junior position at Sterling & Associates, one of LA's top architectural firms. It was a world of glass towers, client lunches at rooftop restaurants, and conversations that revolved around art installations and trips to Milan. At the center of this glittering universe was Julian Sterling, Julian was everything Malik was not. He was white, wealthy, and moved through the world with an unshakable inherited confidence. He saw Nia's raw talent, her hunger, and took her under his wing. He became her mentor, praising her designs, pushing her to be bolder, and opening doors she didn't even know existed. He spoke of a world where ambition wasn't a struggle, but a birthright. In the beginning, it was purely professional, but slowly the lines began to blur, a lingering touch on her arm as he pointed out a detail on a blueprint, a late-night work session that bled into sharing a bottle of expensive wine in his corner office, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. He listened to her talk about Malik, his eyes full of a sympathy that felt dangerously close to something else. He represented a different kind of future, one free from the weight of visiting hours, collect calls, and the suffocating stigma of her husband's incarceration. It was a future that was seductive, intoxicating, and felt like a profound betrayal. She tried to hold on to the world she'd built with Malik. She wrote him long, detailed letters, filling pages with stories about her work to bridge the gap between their two realities. But with each passing month, the gap widened into a chasm. The smell of Malik's world was disinfectant and despair. The smell of her new world was expensive leather and opportunity. And somewhere in the middle of that chasm, Nia Hayes began to lose her footing, torn between the man her husband was and the woman she was becoming. The cracks in the mirror of their shared past were starting to show, and they were threatening to shatter everything. The affair didn't begin with a conscious decision. It began with the subtle shift of air pressure in a first-class cabin on a flight to Chicago. It was Nia's first major business trip, without a senior colleague shadowing her every move. Julian had entrusted her with the final presentation for the landmark Lakeshore Tower project. "You've earned this, Nia," he'd said, his hand resting on her shoulder for just a moment too long. "Go show them what you can do." Chicago was a revelation. The city's architecture was a bold, muscular testament to human ambition, and Nia felt a kinship with it. She and Julian weren't there together, but he had arranged for them to stay at the same luxury hotel overlooking the river. They met for dinner the first night under the pretense of a final strategy session. The restaurant was a hushed, elegant space where a plate of pasta cost more than Malik's monthly prison commissary budget. Julian was charming, attentive. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, not just as an architect, but as a woman. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. With Malik, their conversations were always filtered through a pane of reinforced glass or the static of a prison phone line, always shadowed by the life he'd lost. With Julian, the future felt limitless. "You have a fire in you, Nia," Julian said, his eyes catching the candlelight as he raised his wine glass. "It's a shame to let it be dampened by circumstance." The word circumstance hung in the air between them. It was a delicate, deliberate euphemism for her husband, for Courtroom, for the entire life she was tethered to. After dinner, as they stood by the river, the city lights dancing on the dark water, he gently took her hand. It wasn't a question, but a statement, and in that moment, exhausted by the weight of her loyalty and starved for a simple, uncomplicated human touch, she didn't pull away. His hotel room was on a higher floor than hers. The view was even better. Meanwhile, back in the concrete world of Courtroom, Malik was fighting a different kind of battle. The prison was a living organism with its own hierarchies, its own brutal codes of conduct. As a black man unaffiliated with the major gangs, he had to walk a tightrope of cautious neutrality. He kept his head down, worked long hours in the prison library, and spent his nights reading the books Nia sent, trying to keep his mind from atrophying. But the racial tensions were a constant humming current just beneath the surface. There were the white guards who called him by his inmate number instead of his name, who seemed to take a special pleasure in tossing his cell during inspections. There were the segregated tables in the mess hall, an unspoken rule more powerful than any official regulation. It was a world designed to grind a man down, to strip him of his identity and his hope. His only real connection to the outside world, to the man he used to be, was Nia's letters. In the early years, they were his lifeline. Thick envelopes would arrive weekly, filled with her elegant handwriting, detailing her triumphs and frustrations at work, funny anecdotes about her colleagues, and always affirmations of her love and belief in his innocence. He would read them until the paper grew soft and worn, the words a shield against the crushing despair of his reality. But over the past year, the shield had begun to thin. The letters became less frequent, arriving every 2 weeks, then once a month. They grew shorter, the rich details of her life replaced with vague summaries. The passionate declarations of love faded into a more sisterly, "stay strong," or "thinking of you." He told himself she was just busy, that her career was demanding. He was proud of her success, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in his gut. He found a strange sort of counsel in an older inmate named Pops, a man who was serving a life sentence and had the wisdom of someone who had lost everything. Pops was the library's unofficial custodian, a quiet man with eyes that had seen it all. "The letters are getting thin, ain't they?" Pops observed one afternoon, not even looking up from the book he was mending. Malik stopped his pretense of reading and stared at the wall. "She's just busy. Her job, it's a lot." Pops let out a slow, weary sigh. "A woman's heart ain't like a man's, son. A man can put his love in a box, tuck it away on a shelf, and take it down when he needs it. A woman, her love needs to be tended to. It needs sun and water. You leave it in a dark room for too long, it's gonna wither." He finally looked at Malik, his eyes full of a sad, paternal pity. "It ain't the angry words you gotta worry about in a letter, son. It's the silence between 'em. That's where the truth lives." That night, Malik lay on his bunk, rereading Naya's latest letter. It was barely a page long. She mentioned a successful trip to Chicago, a new potential client. There was no "I love you," only a hastily scrawled "Yours, Nia." The silence between the words was deafening. He could feel it, a cold, empty space opening up between them, a space large enough to hold secrets, lies, and the entire glittering skyline of Chicago. The wither had begun. The prison library at Courtroom was Malik's sanctuary. It was one of the few places where the constant, oppressive noise of the facility dimmed to a manageable hum. The scent of old paper and bookbinding glue was a welcome respite from the ever-present odor of disinfectant. It was here, surrounded by stories of other worlds, that he could almost forget the one he was trapped in. He spent his time studying business manuals and automotive engineering texts, stubbornly clinging to the dream of second-chance motors. It felt like an act of defiance. Nia still sent him magazines, mostly thrillers and sports publications, but occasionally she'd include a copy of Architectural Digest, or L.A. Architect. She said it was so he could keep up with her world. At first he'd appreciated the gesture, but lately, flipping through the glossy pages felt like a form of self-torture. The images depicted a life so far removed from his own, it might as well have been on another planet. Minimalist mansions perched in the Hollywood Hills, chic downtown lofts with floor-to-ceiling windows, and photos of the beautiful, successful people who inhabited them. It was in one of these magazines, on a page detailing a charity gala for the Los Angeles Arts Foundation, that he saw it. It was a small, candid shot in a collage of party photos. The caption was generic. Industry leaders gather to support the arts. But the image was anything but. It showed Naya, radiant in a dark, shimmering dress he'd never seen before. She was laughing, her head tilted back in a way he knew so well. Standing beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, was Julian Sterling. They were standing a little too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that was intimate and exclusionary. They looked like a couple. Malik's world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of his lungs. He stared at the photograph, his vision tunneling until Nia and Julian were the only two people in the universe. He saw her smile, a genuine, unguarded smile he hadn't seen directed at him in years. And then he saw her wrist. Dangling from it, catching the light of the photographer's flash, was the delicate platinum tennis bracelet, the bonus from her generous boss. The magazine page crumpled in his fist. The rustling sound was like a gunshot in the silent library. Pops looked over from his desk, a question in his eyes, but Malik just shook his head, his face a stony mask. The vague unease, the cold dread, the whispers of doubt, they all coalesced into a single, roaring certainty. Pops's words echoed in his mind. "It's the silence you gotta worry about." Her silence had been hiding this. Rage, cold and pure, washed over him, followed by a wave of nausea. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a complete erasure of him, of them. She was living a different life, with a different man, A man who represented everything that had kept people like Malik down. He felt the sting of a betrayal that was not just personal, but racial and social. She hadn't just chosen another man, she'd chosen another world, a wealthy white world that had chewed Malik up and spit him out. He needed to know, not just suspect, not just guess. He needed proof. Malik had spent 5 years avoiding the prison's dark underbelly, but he knew how it worked. He knew who to talk to. That evening, during yard time, he approached a man named Ghost, a lanky, quiet inmate who ran a network of information in and out of the prison walls. Ghost was getting out on parole in 2 weeks. "I need a favor," Malik said, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside him. Ghost eyed him, chewing on a toothpick. "Favors cost." "I've got it," Malik said, referring to the commissary funds he'd been saving. "I need you to find someone for me when you get out. My wife, Nia Hayes, and a man named Julian Sterling. I need you to watch them. I need to know everything." He tore the photo from the magazine, carefully folding the small, damning image and pressing it into Ghost's hand. "This is them. I need to know if this is real." Ghost glanced at the photo, then back at Malik, a flicker of understanding, or maybe pity in his eyes. "Consider it done," he said, pocketing the picture. For the next 2 weeks, Malik lived in a state of suspended animation. The waiting was a unique form of torture. Every day was a battle to maintain his composure, to keep the volcanic rage from erupting. He went through the motions, work, meals, exercise, but his mind was elsewhere, in the glittering streets of Los Angeles, imagining Nia and Julian together. He pictured them in her car, in a restaurant, in the bed he had once shared with her. The images were vivid, brutal, and they played on a loop in his head. He stopped reading her letters altogether. He couldn't bear to see the lies on the page. His hope, the one thing that had sustained him through the darkest years, was curdling into something toxic. The dream of second chance motors now seemed like a cruel joke. What was the point of a second chance if the person you were doing it for was gone? The foundation of his world had been built on Nia's love and loyalty. Now that foundation was gone, and he could feel himself standing on the edge of a precipice, staring down into a darkness he had never known before. The guilt was a physical presence in Nia's life. It sat on her chest when she woke up in her quiet, empty house in View Park. It was the bitter aftertaste in her morning coffee. It was a constant low-grade hum beneath the surface of her busy, successful life. She would catch her reflection in the polished granite of her office lobby and not recognize the woman staring back at her. A woman dressed in designer clothes. A woman who was a stranger to the girl from Crenshaw who had promised to wait forever. Her life had become a carefully constructed compartmentalization. There was her life with Julian, exhilarating, passionate, and forward-looking. They were a power couple, their professional and personal lives seamlessly intertwined. They spent weekends exploring art galleries, attending wine tastings in Santa Barbara, and making plans for a future that included a partnership in the firm and a minimalist house in Malibu that she would design herself. It was the life she had once dreamed of, but it felt hollow, built on a foundation of deceit. Then there was her life with Malik, a life maintained through hollow letters and tense 20-minute phone calls. It was a life of obligation, of history, of a love that now felt more like a heavy chain than a comforting anchor. Every time she heard his voice, hopeful and trusting, a wave of self-loathing would wash over her. She was living a lie, and the effort of maintaining it was slowly eroding her soul. Julian was growing impatient. "I don't understand why you keep putting this off, Nia," he'd say, his tone a mixture of frustration and genuine confusion. "He's not a part of your life anymore. Not really. You deserve to be happy. We deserve to be happy." He couldn't understand. For him, Malik was an abstraction, a circumstance to be managed, a problem to be solved with a good lawyer. He couldn't grasp the intricate web of loyalty, history, and guilt that bound her to the man in Courtroom. To Julian, it was simple. She had outgrown her past. For Nia, it felt like she was amputating a part of herself. The pressure mounted. Julian began talking about marriage, about children. He was offering her the complete picture, the life she saw in the glossy magazines she sometimes sent to Malik. The irony was suffocating. Finally, after a weekend with Julian that felt more suffocating than romantic, she knew she couldn't live the lie any longer. The duplicity was becoming more exhausting than the loyalty had ever been. She made an appointment with a divorce attorney, a sleek woman with an office in Century City that felt as cold and impersonal as the decision she was about to make. "It's a straightforward process, given the circumstances," the lawyer said, her words clinical and detached. "His incarceration simplifies matters from a legal standpoint." Nia flinched. The cold, legal language made her feel like a vulture, picking apart the bones of their marriage while Malik was trapped in a cage. But she signed the retainer. She filled out the paperwork. Each stroke of the pen felt like a cut. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself in the garage, rummaging through old boxes. She was looking for something, though she didn't know what. Her fingers finally brushed against the worn cardboard cover of a spiral notebook. She pulled it out, blowing a layer of dust from its surface. It was Malik's. She sat on the cold concrete floor and opened it. Inside were the meticulously drawn plans for Second Chance Motors. Page after page of sketches, calculations, and notes written in his strong, confident hand. He had designed everything from the hydraulic lifts and the customer waiting area to the small classroom in the back where he planned to hold training sessions. There were lists of community leaders he wanted to partner with, outreach programs he wanted to start. It wasn't just a business plan. It was a manifesto of hope. It was his soul, rendered in graphite and ink. A sob escaped her lips, raw and painful. This was the man she had fallen in love with. The dreamer, the builder, the man who wanted to create something good in a world that had shown him so little of it. And she was about to formally, legally, and irrevocably abandon him. She clutched the notebook to her chest, the sharp edges of the spiral digging into her skin. Julian was offering her a beautiful, prefabricated future, but Malik had offered her the chance to build one, from the ground up, with their own four hands. And she had let that dream die, leaving him to rot in a cell while she built a new life on the ruins of their old one. She knew then what she had to do. She couldn't serve him with papers through a third party. She couldn't let him find out from a lawyer's cold letter. She owed him the truth, face to face. It was the only shred of respect she could offer the man whose dream she held in her hands. She would schedule an unscheduled visit. She would drive up to that concrete hell one last time, look him in the eye, and tell him that their shared blueprint was now just a memory. It would be the hardest thing she had ever done, but she knew she couldn't step into her new life until she closed the door on the old one. The price of her freedom was his heartbreak, and she would have to deliver the bill herself. The call came on a Tuesday. It was a collect call from a burner phone, the connection crackling with static. It was Ghost. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as he delivered the news. "Napa Valley," he said. "A little bed and breakfast called the Vintners Cottage. They were there all weekend. Checked in Friday, checked out Sunday. Under his name, Julian Sterling." There was a pause. "They looked real cozy, man, like they ain't got a care in the world." Malik stood by the bank of phones in the noisy day room. The receiver pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the last, microscopic shard of hope he didn't even know he was still holding. Napa Valley. The name itself was an insult. A world of rolling green hills, expensive wine, and sun-drenched romance. It was the antithesis of his existence. While he was eating bland, starchy food under the hum of fluorescent lights, she was sipping Chardonnay with her lover, looking out over a vineyard. The rage he had been suppressing for weeks finally broke free from its cage. It was no longer a hot, blinding fury, but something colder, heavier, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the cold, hard weight of certainty. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a new life she had chosen, a white life, a rich life, a life where he was nothing but a memory, an inconvenience to be discarded. He hung up the phone without a word and walked back to his cell in a daze. The usual prison noise, the shouting, the clanging of steel, the blare of a television, faded into a dull roar. In his mind, there was only a terrifying silence, the love he had felt for Nia. A love that had been the central organizing principle of his life was undergoing a grotesque alchemy. It was curdling, twisting, and hardening into something else. It was transforming into hate. He knew what he had to do. The thought arrived not as a raging impulse, but as a calm, logical conclusion. A debt had been incurred. A price had to be paid. She had sentenced him to a life without her. He would be her judge and executioner. His mind, once filled with blueprints for community centers, now began designing something else. He needed a weapon. Getting one in Courtroom was easy if you had the connections, but Malik didn't want a prison shank bought with packs of cigarettes. He wanted to make it himself. The act of creation would be a sacrament. It would be personal. His work detail was in the prison's maintenance and fabrication shop, a place of loud noises and flying sparks where inmates repaired furniture and welded metal fixtures. It was a place of constant, low-level chaos, and under the lazy supervision of the guards, small things often went missing. For days he watched, planned, and waited. His opportunity came when a shipment of scrap metal arrived. During a moment of distraction, he managed to palm a 6-inch shard of steel, broken off from a discarded bed frame. It was rough, heavy, and felt perfectly balanced in his hand. He slipped it into the sole of his boot, his heart hammering a steady, resolute rhythm. For the next week, every spare moment was dedicated to his project. He spent hours on the concrete floor of his cell, long after lockdown, using a small piece of stone he had found in the yard to grind an edge onto the steel. The sound of stone scraping against metal was a slow, meditative rhythm, a countdown. With each stroke, he was honing his rage, giving his pain a physical form. He thought of her laugh in the photograph. He thought of Julian's hand on her back. He thought of them in a cottage in Napa. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The blade grew sharper, thinner, more lethal. The final piece of the plan involved getting the weapon to the visiting room. Security was tight, involving pat-downs and metal detectors. But Malik was a student of systems, and he knew that any system, no matter how rigid, has a weak point. The weak point at Courtroom was a guard named Kowalski. Kowalski was a bitter, pot-bellied man with a crew cut and a deep-seated hatred for black inmates. He was a small man who wielded his small power like a club. Malik had seen the way Kowalski looked at him, the open contempt in his eyes. He had also seen Kowalski accept contraband cigarettes from white inmates in exchange for looking the other way. Malik made his move through an intermediary, offering Kowalski the entirety of his commissary savings, nearly $200. The message was simple. I have an unscheduled visit coming up. I need you to be the one on duty at the final checkpoint, and I need you to be distracted. The deal was struck. The night before Nia's visit was scheduled, Kowalski did a surprise inspection of Malik's cell. He made a show of tossing the small space, but his hands never went near the loose brick in the wall where Malik had hidden the sharpened piece of steel. As he left, he looked at Malik and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A sneer played on his lips. He didn't know what Malik was planning, and he didn't care. To him, it was just one more inmate of color heading for trouble, and he was getting paid for it. Malik retrieved the shiv. It was finished. The edge was razor sharp, glinting dully in the dim light of his cell. It was a crude, ugly thing, but to Malik, it was a piece of perfect, terrible art. It was an instrument of justice. He wrapped the handle in tape stripped from a library book and carefully slid it back into the hollowed-out sole of his boot. He lay on his bunk, his hands folded behind his head, and stared at the ceiling. He felt no fear, no hesitation. He felt only a profound and terrifying calm. The storm inside him had passed. All that was left was the cold, clear certainty of the coming dawn. The air in visiting room 4 was thick with the weight of unspoken words. It was the same pale green room, the same scuffed table, the same humming fluorescent lights. But everything felt different. The space between them, usually filled with a desperate attempt to reconnect, was now a dead, empty vacuum. Malik watched Nia as she sat down. She was wearing a somber navy blue suit, as if dressed for a funeral. Her hands were trembling slightly as she placed a thick manila envelope on the table between them. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He remained standing, a silent, imposing figure, letting the silence stretch until it was taut and unbearable. "Malik," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." He said nothing. He just watched her, his face an unreadable mask of calm. This unnerved her more than any shouting match could have. The Malik she knew was passionate, quick to anger, but also quick to forgive. This man was a stranger, a block of ice. I came here to tell you something, she stammered, pushing the envelope an inch closer to him. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. My life has changed, Malik. I've changed. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I know, he said. The words were quiet, flat, but they hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened in confusion. What? I know about him, he continued, his voice still devoid of any emotion. Julian Sterling, the senior partner, your generous boss. The blood drained from Nia's face. She looked like she'd been struck. How could you possibly... Without taking his eyes off her, Malik reached into the pocket of his prison-issued jumpsuit. He slowly pulled out a small, folded piece of glossy paper and laid it on the table. It was the crumpled photograph from the magazine. Nia stared at the image of her and Julian, laughing together, their intimacy captured for the world to see. A picture is worth 1,000 words, isn't it? Malik said, a slight mirthless smile touching his lips for the first time. But I'm a thorough man. I wanted to know the whole story. So I found out about the dinners, the late nights at the office. I even found out about your romantic little getaway. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. How was Napa in the fall, Nia? Was the wine good? A choked sob escaped Nia's lips, her carefully prepared speech, her attempts to be honest and gentle, all of it crumbled into dust. She was exposed, her lies laid bare under the harsh institutional lights. Malik, please, she pleaded, her hands clutching the divorce papers as if they were a shield. I was going to tell you everything. That's why I came. I never wanted you to find out this way. What way did you want me to find out? He shot back, a flicker of heat finally entering his voice. In a letter from a lawyer? Did you think you could just erase 5 years of my life? 5 years I've spent in this hellhole thinking of you, of us, and just walk away clean? It wasn't like that, she cried, tears now streaming down her face. I fell in love with him. I didn't plan it. It happened. It just happened. He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was the sound of something breaking. You think this just happened? You think this life I'm living just happened? No. Choices were made. You made your choice, Nia. You chose his world over ours. He stood up straight, his shadow falling over her. She instinctively recoiled, pressing herself back into her chair. For the first time, she felt a genuine spike of fear. The man standing before her was not her husband. He was someone else, someone forged in the fires of bitterness and betrayal. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I am so sorry. It's too late for sorry, he said softly. At that precise moment, a low, mechanical whir filled the room. The security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, programmed to pan across the room on an automated schedule, slowly swiveled away from the table. Its lens moved from the two of them toward the empty doorway, a routine, pre-programmed sweep. For the next 30 seconds, the table where they sat would be in a perfect, unrecorded blind spot. Malik's hand moved with a calm, fluid motion toward his boot. Nia saw the movement. She saw the change in his eyes, the placid mask cracking to reveal the abyss of rage beneath. Her apology died on her lips, replaced by a gasp of terror. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He rose from his chair, a dark silhouette against the pale green walls. The last thing she saw wasn't the weapon. It was his face, a tragic canvas of lost love and unimaginable pain. Then, the silence of the room was shattered and the world went dark. The first guard to enter the room, a rookie named Evans, would later tell investigators he didn't process the scene at first. His mind simply refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. The sheer amount of blood was the first shock. It was a stark, obscene crimson against the pale green walls and beige linoleum. Then he saw Malik Hayes standing perfectly still beside the table, his jumpsuit splattered, his hands hanging limply at his sides. And, at his feet, Nia Hayes, her body a broken doll in a navy blue suit. Evans fumbled for his radio, his voice cracking as he called in the code. Man down! Visiting room 4! Medical emergency! But he knew it was no emergency. It was an ending. Within minutes, the room was swarmed by the prison's crisis response team, clad in tactical gear. They moved with brutal efficiency, slamming Malik against the wall, cuffing his hands behind his back with practiced violence. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He was utterly placid, his body pliant, his eyes vacant, as if the part of him that had committed the act had already departed, leaving only an empty shell behind. The prison lockdown was in full effect. The outside world was sealed off. 2 hours later, Detective Beckett's unmarked sedan crunched to a stop in the prison's now crowded parking lot. Beckett was a man slouching toward retirement, a 30-year veteran of the force whose idealism had long ago been eroded away by the endless tide of human misery he witnessed daily. He moved with a weary slowness, his face a roadmap of cynicism. He viewed every case not as a puzzle to be solved, but as paperwork to be processed. He was met at the entrance by the warden, a stern, tight-lipped man whose primary concern was containing the PR nightmare now unfolding within his facility. "It's a mess, Beckett," the warden said, forgoing any pleasantries. "Happened right in the middle of a visit. His wife." "I got the basics," Beckett grunted, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "He confess?" "Hasn't said a word, just sits there," the warden replied, leading him through the now silent corridors. The visiting room had become a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned it off. Forensics technicians in white coveralls moved in a quiet, methodical dance, dusting for prints, collecting evidence, their cameras flashing with cold, clinical precision. Nia's body had been covered with a sheet, but its shape was still starkly, horribly visible. Beckett took in the scene with a practiced, dispassionate eye. The overturned chair, the bloody envelope of divorce papers on the table, the small, crumpled magazine photo lying next to it. He knelt, examining the photo without touching it. A beautiful couple, smiling at a party. "Well, there's your motive," he said to no one in particular. "The oldest one in the book. Hell hath no fury like a man scorned." His new partner, Detective Ramirez, stood by the doorway, her presence a quiet contrast to Beckett's gruff world-weariness. She was younger, sharper, her eyes missing nothing. Where Beckett saw a simple, familiar story, she saw unanswered questions. "What about the weapon?" she asked, her voice calm and even. "They haven't found it yet," the warden admitted, his jaw tightening. "They've searched him, searched the room. Nothing." Beckett shrugged, straightening up with a groan. "He probably flushed it or passed it off. Doesn't matter. We got him standing over the body, covered in her blood. We got a confession waiting to happen. This is an open and shut case, a crime of passion. Inmate finds out his wife is cheating, wants a divorce. He snaps. We'll have this wrapped up by morning." Ramirez didn't respond. She walked over to the corner of the room, looking up at the security camera. The camera logs show it panned away from the table exactly 37 seconds before the first guard responded to the panic button, she stated, reading from her notepad. "A pre-scheduled sweep." "Convenient for him," Beckett grunted, already mentally drafting his report. "Guy got lucky." "Or he knew the schedule," Ramirez countered softly. Beckett shot her an annoyed look. He hated complications. He hated partners who looked for them. "Look, Ramirez, don't go turning this into some kind of conspiracy. The guy is a convicted felon. His wife was leaving him for a rich guy. He killed her. End of story. Let's not waste time and taxpayer money chasing ghosts. Let's go talk to him, get the confession, and I can still make it home in time for the late news." But Ramirez wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the scene, on the brutal tableau of violence. Beckett saw a predictable tragedy, a simple equation of jealousy plus opportunity. Ramirez saw a series of deliberate actions. The unscheduled visit, the potential knowledge of the camera's blind spot, and most importantly, the missing weapon. To her, this wasn't just a man who had snapped. This was a man who had planned, and that changed everything. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The interrogation room was a small, windowless box, painted the same soul-crushing beige as the rest of the prison's administrative wing. The air was cold and smelled faintly of stale coffee. Malik Hayes sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him. The blood had been washed from his hands, but a dark stain remained on his prison jumpsuit, a stark reminder of his actions. He stared at the wall, his expression a perfect blank. Detective Beckett lumbered in, dropping a thin file on the table with a thud designed to get a reaction. He got none. He sat down opposite Malik, adopting the tired, seen-it-all persona that had served him for 3 decades. All right, Hayes, Beckett began, his voice a low grumble. Let's make this easy on everyone. We know what happened. You know what happened. We have you at the scene, covered in her blood. All we need is for you to tell us why. You tell us your story, show a little remorse. Maybe the DA goes easy on you. Malik slowly turned his head, his eyes focusing on Beckett for the first time. They were like two polished stones, cold and empty. She was my wife, he said, his voice a dry rasp. I killed her. Okay, Beckett said, leaning back, a satisfied smirk on his face. We're getting somewhere. That's a confession. Now, tell me about the weapon. What did you use? Where is it now? Malik's gaze drifted back to the wall. I killed her, he repeated, the same monotone, as if it were the only sentence he had left. Detective Ramirez, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. Her approach was different. She sat down next to Beckett, her demeanor calm and non-confrontational. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice gentle, we found the divorce papers. We found the photograph. We understand you were in a great deal of pain. Sometimes, when people are in that much pain, they do things they wouldn't normally do. Can you tell us what was going through your mind when she showed you those papers? For a moment, a flicker of something, grief, anger, a memory, crossed Malik's face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He retreated back into his vacant shell. She was my wife. I killed her. They spent another hour in that room, a frustrating cycle of questions met with the same three-word mantra. Beckett grew increasingly agitated, his face flushing with anger. Ramirez remained patient, probing, watching. But Malik had built a wall around himself that was as impenetrable as the ones that surrounded the prison. Finally, Beckett slammed his hand on the table. Fine! You want to play tough guy? Be my guest. We don't need you to tell us what you used. We'll charge you with first-degree murder and let you rot in a supermax for the rest of your life. He stormed out of the room, muttering about wasted time. Ramirez lingered for a moment, her eyes fixed on Malik. The weapon matters, Mr. Hayes, she said quietly. It tells a story, and right now, you're not the one telling it. He gave no reaction. With a small sigh, she turned and left. Back in the temporary command post they'd set up in the warden's office, Beckett was already on the phone with the district attorney's office. Yeah, we got a full confession, he said, stretching the truth. He admitted to the killing. We're good to go. Ramirez closed the door behind her. That wasn't a confession, Frank, she said, her voice sharp. It was a statement of fact. He's not talking, and we still don't have a weapon. It doesn't matter, Beckett snapped, hanging up the phone. The DA is happy. We have more than enough to convict. Why are you so obsessed with the weapon? Because its absence suggests planning, she insisted, her frustration mounting. A crime of passion, a man snapping. He uses whatever is at hand, a chair, a pen, his bare hands. Or, if he does have a weapon, he's not thinking clearly enough to dispose of it so perfectly that a dozen guards and a forensics team can't find it within minutes. The fact that it's gone means he had a plan for it to be gone. That's not passion, Frank. That's premeditation. Beckett rolled his eyes. You've been watching too many movies, kid. He's a con. He knows the system. He probably has a buddy who was waiting to flush it down a toilet the second the alarm went off. It's a dead end. Or it's still here, she countered, her mind racing. Hidden somewhere he planned to hide it. And how do you propose we find one little piece of metal in a facility that houses 3,000 inmates and covers 50 acres? We can't search every cell, every pipe, every corner. We don't have to, Ramirez said, a new determination in her voice. We get a K9 unit, a dog trained to sniff out residue, blood, sweat, human scent on metal. It's a long shot, but it's better than closing a case with this many holes in it. Beckett let out a loud, exasperated sigh. It was more paperwork, more hassle, more time spent on a case he already considered closed. But he saw the look in her eye, the stubborn refusal to back down. He knew it was a fight he wouldn't win. Fine, he grumbled, rubbing his tired face. Make the call. Get your dog. But when it finds nothing, this case is closed. End of story. Ramirez was already dialing. For Beckett, it was the end of a story. For her, it was a fight to make sure they were telling the right one. The shadow of justice was long, and she was determined to shine a light into its darkest corners, no matter how much her partner wanted to stay in the dark. The next morning, the atmosphere at Corcoran was still thick with tension, but the controlled chaos of the previous day had settled into a sullen, watchful quiet. The arrival of the K-9 unit was a break in the monotony. Detective Ramirez met the handler, a stern professional state trooper named Marcus, at the main gate. Beside him, quivering with contained energy, was a Belgian Malinois named Kilo. The dog was a sleek, muscular animal, his intelligent eyes taking in everything, his focus absolute. Detective Beckett watched from a distance, arms crossed, a look of profound skepticism on his face. "A goddamn dog," he muttered to the warden. "This is what it's come to." Ramirez ignored him, briefing Marcus on the situation. The weapon is likely a homemade shiv, probably metal. The suspect, Malik Hayes, was in visiting room 4. He was taken directly to an interrogation room, then to a segregated housing unit. We need to trace his path, but more importantly, we need to think about disposal. Where could he have gotten rid of it between the act and being apprehended? The window of opportunity was small, Marcus noted, his hand resting reassuringly on Kilo's head. He was subdued within a minute of the alarm, but he was alone with the body for a few moments before that, Ramirez mused. And the room itself has a toilet. That was the first place they searched. Nothing, which means if he got rid of it, it was somewhere else, somewhere planned. They decided to start with a wider net. The prison's plumbing and waste disposal systems were a labyrinth. If the shiv had been flushed, it might still be in a nearby trap. If it had been passed to someone, it could be anywhere. Ramirez's theory, however, was that Malik wouldn't have entrusted the crucial piece of evidence to anyone else. He would have handled it himself. For hours, Kilo worked. The dog was a marvel of focus and training. He moved with a purposefulness that was almost unnerving, his nose twitching, sampling the air, his paws silent on the concrete floors. Marcus led him through the visiting area, along the corridor Malik had been taken, and into the interrogation room. Kilo showed interest in the bloodstains, in the chair where Malik had sat, but gave no definitive alert for a weapon. Beckett was growing more impatient by the hour. "See? Nothing. A waste of time." Ramirez ignored his grumbling, her mind working through the logistics of the prison. "What about the emergency protocols?" she asked the warden. "When that alarm goes off, what happens? Who moves where?" "Every inmate is locked down. Every guard is on high alert. But there are systems that keep running. Ventilation, waste processing," the warden explained. "Waste processing," Ramirez repeated, her eyes lighting up. "The laundry chutes, the garbage disposals from the kitchens and common areas. Where do they lead?" The warden described a network of chutes and tunnels that led to a central processing area in the prison's industrial block, where everything was sorted for incineration or disposal. It was a long shot. The area was vast, a chaotic mess of machinery and refuse. The smells were overwhelming, a nauseating cocktail that would challenge any dog's senses. But it was a possibility. Marcus was hesitant. "It's a sensory overload. It could be impossible for him to isolate one scent in there." "Let's try," Ramirez urged. They took Kilo to the industrial block. The noise was deafening, the stench overpowering. The dog, for the first time, seemed hesitant, his ears flattening against his head. But Marcus gave him a quiet command, and his training took over. He began to work, weaving through piles of trash bags and overflowing laundry carts, his nose to the ground. An hour passed, then another. Beckett had given up entirely and was sulking by the entrance. Then Kilo stopped. He was standing near a large, grated drain in the floor, part of the runoff system for the industrial washers. He whined softly, his tail giving a low, stiff wag. He looked back at Marcus, then back at the drain, and whined again, more insistently. "What is it, boy?" Marcus said, kneeling beside him. Kilo nudged the heavy iron grate with his nose and let out a single, sharp bark. It took 2 maintenance workers with a crowbar to pry the grate open. The pipe below was dark and slick with grime. Using a high-powered flashlight, Ramirez peered into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but sludge, but then a faint glint of reflected light caught her eye. "There," she breathed. "There's something down there." Using a long mechanical grabber, a forensics tech carefully reached into the pipe. After a moment of probing, he pulled it back up. Clamped in its metal claws was a 6-inch piece of sharpened steel, its handle crudely wrapped in black tape. Even through the grime, The dark reddish-brown stains near the tip were unmistakable. A silence fell over the small group. Beckett stared at the shiv, his cynical expression replaced by one of stunned disbelief. Ramirez looked from the weapon back to the drain. The drain was located more than 50 yards from the visiting area, in a completely different wing of the prison. There was no way Malik could have gotten here, but a laundry chute from the hallway right outside the visiting rooms. It emptied into a large bin, not 10 feet from this very spot. Her theory crystallized. Malik had stabbed his wife. In the seconds before the guards stormed in, he had walked to the door, opened the small hatch of the laundry chute in the hallway, an act that would have been unnoticed in the chaos, and dropped the weapon. He had known exactly where it would go. He had planned every single step. "Well, I'll be damned," Beckett said, his voice a low whisper. Ramirez looked at him, her expression grim. "This isn't a crime of passion, Frank," she said, her voice steady. "This is an execution." The discovery of the shiv didn't close the case. It blew it wide open, transforming it from a simple domestic tragedy into a calculated, cold-blooded murder. The story had just gotten a lot darker. The trial of Malik Hayes was short and brutal. The courtroom was a somber, wood-paneled space that seemed to absorb all sound, creating a heavy, expectant silence. Malik sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his court-appointed attorney. He was thinner, his eyes holding a permanent, haunted emptiness. He looked like a man already serving a life sentence. His defense attorney tried valiantly to construct a narrative of a crime of passion. He painted a picture of a devoted husband languishing in prison, whose mind had been broken by the ultimate betrayal. He spoke of temporary insanity, a fugue state brought on by unbearable emotional distress. He put psychologists on the stand who testified about the unique pressures of incarceration and their effects on the human psyche. But the prosecution, led by a sharp, ambitious assistant district attorney, dismantled their case piece by piece with cold, hard facts. Their star witness was Detective Ramirez, who calmly and methodically detailed the discovery of the murder weapon. She explained the prison layout, the location of the laundry chute, and the calculated series of actions Malik would have had to take to dispose of the shiv. This was not the act of a man who snapped, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement, her voice ringing with conviction. This was the act of a man who planned. He forged a weapon. He bribed a guard. Kowalski, under pressure, had confessed to taking the bribe in exchange for a lighter disciplinary action. He knew the security camera's blind spot. And he had an escape route, not for himself, but for the evidence. This was not a moment of passion. This was an assassination. The final nail in the coffin was the testimony of Ghost, who, after being tracked down by Ramirez, reluctantly testified about Malik's request to have his wife followed. It proved that Malik's suspicions had been building for weeks, giving him ample time to plan his revenge. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. The verdict was read into the silent courtroom. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant, Malik Hayes, guilty. There was no outburst from Malik. He didn't flinch. He simply stared forward as his fate was sealed. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, California's highest security facility, a place reserved for the most dangerous offenders, a prison within a prison. His dream of a second chance was now a statistical impossibility. The ripples of that day in the visiting room spread far and wide. Julian Sterling, hounded by the media and consumed by a guilt he could never publicly admit, resigned from his partnership and left Los Angeles. The dream house he and Naya were planning would never be built. He had offered her a new life, and in the end, had led her to her death. In the aftermath, Detectives Beckett and Ramirez sat in a quiet bar, the case files officially closed. Beckett, who was just weeks from retirement, swirled the ice in his drink. "You were right, kid," he admitted, his voice raspy. "I saw what I wanted to see, an easy case, a simple story. I didn't want to look any deeper." "It's easy to do," Ramirez said, though there was no judgment in her voice. "Sometimes the truth is messy." "This whole thing is messy," Beckett mused, staring into his glass. "Everyone lost. The wife is dead. The lover is a ghost. And Hayes? He threw away the last shred of a life he had. For what? Revenge? It's all just a waste." He was right. It was a tragedy of epic proportions, a vortex of betrayal, jealousy, and violence that had consumed everyone it touched. But the story of Malik and Naya Hayes wasn't just a simple tale of infidelity and revenge. It was a more profound and disturbing American tragedy. The lesson, buried in the ashes of their shattered lives, was a sobering one. It spoke to how a system, rife with inequality and prejudice, can become a pressure cooker for the human soul. Malik Hayes was not born a monster. He was a dreamer, a man with a vision for a better life, for himself and his community. But when his future was stolen by a flawed justice system, and his only connection to that dream, his wife's love, was severed. The man he was died long before he ever picked up that piece of steel. His hope was starved, his love was betrayed, and in the suffocating darkness of his despair, a monster was born. The tragedy of Malik Hayes is a testament to the fact that when you strip a person of hope, when you corner them in a world without light, you don't just break a man, you create the conditions for him to break the world around him. The ultimate crime wasn't just the one that happened in Visiting Room 4, it was the slow, systemic crime that had set the stage for it years before. It's a reminder that justice is not merely about punishing the guilty, but about creating a world where hope is not a privilege, and second chances are more than just a forgotten dream in a dusty notebook.